So I think there are people in our pews and chairs who are entrepreneurial, who love Jesus, who are created to do way more than we're allowing them to do. Right. And we've created them to be part of a church, to do church things, maybe even to lead a small group, but not to start a movement, not to win their friends to Christ, not to start something brand new in their neighborhood that didn't exist before. So.
We are here today with my friend Dwight Nash, who runs an organization called 1,000 Churches. Now, for everybody out there, let me let them know that for a number of years, you've been coming up to the plate on a regular basis and coaching our church planters, our multipliers, and kind of coaching a lot of our pastors. And so you've been helping us with that, and really appreciate that. So you've made a huge difference. Many of you maybe don't know this guy, but he's actually affected your life. So, so here's what I want to do. I want to talk about your passion for church planting. I want to talk about how you got there. So why don't we just start here? Tell us your story. Tell me how you got to where you are, and then let's talk about maybe what church planting looks like.
Fair enough. So, college degree, theology.
From Oklahoma Wesleyan?
Oklahoma Wesleyan.
Yeah. Okay.
Went to seminary up in Chicago, a place called Trinity Evangelical. It's a great school, mission-minded. Mm-hmm. Even had a friend that planted a church during our time there. But I'm dense enough that I didn't connect all the dots on that. I kind of felt like church planting was for people who couldn't find a real job, and so they had to start their own church because nobody.
We should probably let everybody know that at our age, church planting was not the cool thing to do when we came out of college.
It was not. It was if you couldn't find a job, maybe somebody would let you do that, and it didn't pay well, and it destroyed a lot of lives actually because everybody was doing it and they really weren't trained to do it. So. Anyway, I graduated from seminary. I'm a pastor in New Orleans, and going to New Orleans completely changed the trajectory of my life, how I thought about ministry. I was called to either there was invitations to either go to Montana or to New Orleans.
But you grew up in Montana.
I grew up in Montana. That was going home. Okay. That was easy. It was going back to what I know. And most people would say, well, if you're going to be successful in ministry, go to the places you're used to, right? I had spent 1 week south of the Mason-Dixon line in my life prior to saying yes to New Orleans. But to go to New Orleans meant it was 92% Catholic. It meant you dealt with Mardi Gras, Bourbon Street, Wiccans and witches. Biggest holiday is Halloween. Like, it's way out of my comfort zone. And those were the days of understanding missional church and understanding going to people more than maybe just saying, come to us. And so we became very involved in the community. I was a PTA president, working with people in the schools, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, that's the background of just a different type of ministry that probably changed the trajectory of how I think about ministry. Pastor Jimmy, for anybody who might know him, was an influential person in the Wesleyan Church. He was my district superintendent.
Pastor Jimmy Johnson.
Jimmy Johnson, yeah. And he influenced my life. He was actually my pastor when I was Oklahoma Wesleyan and had kind of parted ways for a while, but he invited me into that ministry opportunity. And he invited me to go to another conference.
Right.
I go to a conference, there's some guys there, they're talking about church planting. And though my friend in seminary was helping to do that, we had attended, still I had that idea that it was for the dropouts and those who couldn't get a real job. And if you got a real job, you went to a great church, you found a position. Right. It just never clicked. Like I said, I'm that dense. It never clicked that this might actually be an evangelistic strategy that was worth going after. And I came away from that saying, I want to plant churches. Right. I actually believe, for many reasons, that that is the best way that we're going to have the opportunity to reach our world. Saturation church planting, going places that the established church can't go. New churches are, statistically speaking, always way more evangelistically oriented than established churches. These are statistically speaking.
Right. But why do you think that is?
One is survival. When you're a brand new church, you don't survive if you don't go get people to join your church and ask them to accept Jesus. You're a lot program-oriented in an established church versus people-oriented. So some of it's just survival. You don't survive if you don't win people to Jesus. But here's the statistics. Like, let's leave all churches out of it. Let's just say this is the statistics. It takes 50 people in an established church that's 50 years old to lead one person to Jesus. Right. It takes 3 people in a new church to lead people to Jesus. So it's just the rate of people come to Jesus. And so I said, wow. And they're going to know people. Usually if you've been a Christian for a long time, you just don't have contacts anymore because you've kind of insulated yourself in your church world. And yet here are new people off the street. They come to know Jesus, and you say, well, who are your friends? Let's go get them too, and let's help them find Jesus.
Ministry is a lot about tapping into different circles of people and somehow bringing the gospel into that circle of people. And you're right, established churches, established Christians, they get to where their circles are already all Christianized.
Yeah, even now, I'm assuming in a church this size, there's like that person, they brought 20.
Yes.
That person, they brought 30.
Right.
And then there's a lot of other people never brought anybody, right? And I know churches, they'll say like, that person, if that person hadn't come, we wouldn't have these 30 people. It was their whole circle of influence.
Yeah.
So
I've also thought with church planting and why churches, because I've tried to unpack this question. The statistics are what they are, but why are they that? And I've always kind of thought that a pastor, a person with an evangelistic bent,
like yourself,
tends to go into church planting or church renewal, one of those two. And church renewal is often, it was awesome here at La Plata, but church renewal is often very painful.
Yeah, and I think again, I'm going to just go statistics so that way we can leave churches like that church.
Right, gotcha.
But 20% of church renewals don't work.
Right.
Yet these days, the way we plant churches, it's at an 80% success rate. And so you just compare those two things, and I'm not saying we shouldn't renew churches. Your church is a perfect example of why we should. It should be both and, but at the end of the day, it's easier to start a church. It's more successful most of the time. And so I just have a personal bent to say my life is going to be about church planting. So for all those reasons, you asked why. I went after church planting. There was many things I didn't understand. I wanted to plant a church in Baton Rouge when we were in New Orleans. I wanted to go to the North Shore. To be fair, we didn't do any of that, but that didn't mean I didn't have a heart for that. It was after my ministry in Louisiana that I was called to be a district superintendent for Texas, Louisiana. And so I came into that position saying, we can't remain who we are. There were 20 churches in all of Texas and Louisiana. That's an embarrassment for the Wesleyan Church. And I said, we're going to plant churches. Now, also, to be fair, the first couple that we tried planting, I asked people who were friends of mine to plant churches. These were, again, the days there wasn't a lot of really great training. We said, hey, would you do that? We gave some resources, some dollars, but I wasn't there for them in a way I needed to be. I didn't recognize the emotional toil it was going to take. I didn't recognize what training looked like. I said, hey, here's some dollars, go do that. Good luck. That's what it felt like in hindsight. Both of those stayed open for about 2-3 years and failed. Now, they did a lot of good things while they were there, but they don't exist anymore. There was turmoil in the lives of those pastors, their kids. I'm a pastor's kid. I understand what it means to be in a household like that, experience some trauma in ministry. I can't let that happen again. So it was then that I actually went and said, man, I'm going to get the best training I can in order to give them the best training and experience in the future, for pastors who want to plant churches. And so I went and got a doctorate in church planting. I studied the best residencies in the United States that were training up church planters, that were giving them good opportunities to learn and to grow. And so it was then I created what I believed was a world-class residency to help people get ready to plant churches. And since that's nearly 10 years ago now, I've had that burden. Now, we did that in Texas and Louisiana, and we've grown quickly for at least a Wesleyan district in that way. In my time as a district superintendent, those new churches accounted for like 83% of the growth in our district, which goes back to they were evangelistic. They were accounting for the baptisms in our district compared to the old churches. So I love church planters. I love church planting. I love what it means for the kingdom. And that's what I feel like I wanted to give my life to. Now, you know my story well enough. I've tried to help you guys. I've been in the Northwest District helping. I've been in the Mountain Plains District. I was a lead pastor while trying to do all that. So you asked, well, how did 1,000 churches come about? So I love church planters. I love church planting. I actually believe that church planting is the key to saturation of our communities. You're the one who often talks about driving down the road and every 6 cars, every 4 cars, how many are Christians, how many aren't? Can one church reach all those people? I believe different pastors are designed to reach different people. I talk about rhinos and rabbits a lot in terms of this, that there are large churches that reach kinds of people.
A large church would be a rhino.
A rhino, and gestation periods of rhinos with all of the infrastructure it takes to do that. Like that's a lot of money. That's a lot of resources. And certain churches can do that, but not everybody can do that. But every church can reproduce rabbits, and rabbits are born pregnant, it seems, as fast as they actually reproduce. And I want to see.
By the way, rabbits are not born pregnant. This is a phrase that exists in the church planting world. So.
But every few months, they're able to have new ones, where rhinos, I think the gestation period is like 2 years. I just use that as an example to say it takes a long time to plant another large church. There are a lot of things that go into that. But I feel like there are many, many people in our churches who can actually plant what I call rabbit churches in bars and schools and houses and other places.
You would allow somebody to plant a church in a bar?
Absolutely. I'm sure that's been done many times. We're working with some now. So, yes, I absolutely would. We'll leave it at that. I won't go into details. But if you're going to go to where lost people are, like rabbits get into my backyard all the time, and they eat things, they cause messes because they come in under fences. Like a mega church, a large church, they can't go into those places, but your people can, and those small gatherings can. And so I just want all of God's people to be released to start locations, places, ways of interacting with people around the gospel. And a big word, ecclesial, or minimum ecclesiology. What is a church? What should that look like? Those are all other conversations, but let's take the gospel to a lot of places. So rewind, right? So God's starting to talk to me about church planting. I'm a lead pastor. I'm helping in many districts. And frankly, it's not healthy for anybody, what I was doing in my life. The church wasn't getting enough of me. Church planting wasn't getting enough of me. And so there was a lot of wrestling, Mike. And I wrestled through some of it with you. Like, am I crazy? What am I thinking? This is a great church I'm a part of. I loved everything I was doing, but I felt like I could be more effective for the kingdom. And there are those moments in time when you get a certain age and you say, okay, I've got a certain amount of years left. How am I going to make an impact? Not legacy, but there's an impact I want to leave. And this is the impact I felt like I was perfectly positioned to do. I had many relationships. I was already doing it, but I wasn't able to give all my time to it. And there was just a moment when I felt complete release from Sent Church. I felt God did some miracles on that side that we could talk about in terms of filling that for me and me not feeling the guilt of leaving that place, which thank you, Jesus, for that. And I'm great friends with that pastor. We're able to multiply out of there as well while this is all going on. But God said, what would it look like if you gave the rest of your ministry life to starting 1,000 churches everywhere, from everywhere to everywhere? And God has given me relationships in Peru, relationships a little bit with you guys through Guatemala, but a terrific relationship that could take another 10 minutes to talk about in India. And I learned from them. Like, they want me to come and teach them in India how to do this. And I'm like, dudes, I'm here to learn from you, because it is a church planting movement that they invited me into, that we are at 2,680 churches in India through this relationship. And so I'm teaching them disciple making. You got to understand, they have a 3rd grade education, but they're doing way more for the gospel than I am, right? So I'm teaching them Bible. I'm teaching them one-on-one disciple making.
Somehow they seem to be able to just plant churches like rabbits. I mean, it's
they don't
really
need all the
resources.
Like we do trainings. We'll do 2 trainings a year. We'll do 60 pastors at a training. Now, there's ongoing training, just like we would in college. There's ongoing training, but we don't wait for them for 4 years or 8 years to get trained and then say, all right, you're good enough, now you can go out and do this. So we're rapidly multiplying those churches. We're sending them out with a bike and a Bible, and they're starting churches. And man, they're laying it on the line. They are being persecuted. There is, influence from the government in India that they're not pleased with. But man, I'll go there in 1 week. We'll start 3 or 4 churches in 1 week because we'll walk from house to house and from village to village. And before we've left that week, they've appointed a pastor who's graduated from their training, and we have a new church there. And you'd go like, oh, but it's probably small. It's 40 people, and before the next time I go back, it's 100 people. And there's no Christian influence in that village when you show up and you preach the gospel. Crazy miracles are happening, and it's living out Acts every time I go there. So I bring a little bit of that back and say, why not us? Why not here? And so God's been kind to me.
Let's talk about this in the U.S. context for a moment. Are you suggesting that the average churchgoer who's been sitting in the pew for 5-10 years could plant a church?
I think we have way underutilized folks who are sitting in our chairs, pews. I am inspired. We're Wesleyan, right? So I'm inspired by Wesley. I'm inspired by the fact that he didn't send his people to college and to seminary before they could be used by God to start things. The Baptists had their farmer preachers that they released into the mission field. There was training, but it wasn't that formalized training that said, I'm going to take you out of the mission field for 4 years and teach you all these things, and you're thinking you're really smart, and then we're going to send you back to a church now. Like, people lose their passion, I think, during that time. It's kind of why our whole residency things have come about, because people are removed from ministry for a long time while they're getting this degree that supposedly makes them better. I think it taught pastors to lead churches better. I don't think it taught them to necessarily lead people better, to start things, to be entrepreneurial. So I think there are people in our pews and chairs who are entrepreneurial, who love Jesus, who are created to do way more than we're allowing them to do. And we've created them to be part of a church, to do church things, maybe even to lead a small group, but not to start a movement, not to win their friends to Christ, not to start something brand new in their neighborhood that didn't exist before. So we just are continually talking more about mobilizing all of God's people for the mission, and think of this army that's out there waiting to be mobilized, that we've said, well, hey, do you think you could hand out bulletins? I just think we've dumbed down what they are capable of. And so we want to teach them to make disciples that make disciples, to then say, wow, maybe I'm made for more than that. In your guys' case, watch parties and other things where you're saying, yeah, but you could do way more than show up on a Sunday morning, and those are good things. Make cookies, hand out the bulletins, watch the kids in the nursery and teach. Those are great things. Some of our people are made for more than that, and if so, we want to give them what they need to do that.
So are you? Let me ask you a different question. You mentioned the phrase earlier, a minimum ecclesiology. What is? Let me ask this in a normal human's language.
Okay.
What is success? If let's say I decide I've been going to church for 20 years and I'm in. I'll just pick a profession. Let's say I'm a real estate agent. I've been going to church for 20 years, but I think God might have more for me. I'm not going to quit real estate, not going to quit what I'm doing, but I want to start a church. What's success? Do I have to run off to seminary? Obviously, we just said no to that. Am I looking for 1,000 people to show up? What's success?
Well, let's first of all do the whole megachurch statistics. Like, there are more megachurches today than there ever have been in the United States, and yet less people are going to church than ever. We are not changing society through this method of doing it. So it's, again, how do we get into the nook and crannies? Whatever percentage you think of people who aren't going to go to church, there's a percentage out there that never walking through the doors. It doesn't matter how great you are as a church. So how are we going to release our people into their sphere of influence, their relationships, so that they can lead them to Jesus, so that they can be an influence on them, so that they can make disciples of them, and who knows what's in their sphere of influence, right? It's there may be people who are other real estate agents who actually are way more talented than the one you're talking to in your church, who are made for more too, and they may even be a church planter that's a mega church. It does, I just want to release all of God's people. So no, I don't think you're not saying, hey, can you lead a church of 1,000, which also lowers the bar of leadership, right? I think we always say, hey, we need a level 10 leader to lead something like what you're leading, but a level 4 leader can lead a Bible study at the Remax Real Estate or at Keller Williams in the morning, and they can have fellowship, they can gather, they can do disciple making. And so once again, it's in more places, it lowers the bar of leadership, and it allows, it's almost an all play. And let's go back to the equipping of all the saints, of the priesthood of all believers. How do we do that? Versus saying, hey, we're the professionals, let us do the ministry, you guys help us. So now I'm just way more into, you do your thing and I'll come alongside you. A lot of circles now are calling it hero makers. And for a long time, frankly, the pastors were the heroes. We were viewed as the ones who had it all figured out, and you guys come alongside us to help us do our thing here at the church. And now I'm just saying, let's flip the script. You guys are the heroes, we're the hero makers. We're the ones coming alongside. So now you're Batman, we're Robin. Right? And we want to come alongside, or whoever who helped Batman, who was the guy that was in the cave helping him. Alfred? Alfred, right? So maybe you're Alfred, and maybe I'm Alfred, and I'm actually trying to help you be Batman. I'm coming up with all the cool gadgets, but you're the one who's out on the front lines actually saving the world.
So I would be probably correct in saying that in the U.S. history, church history of the United States, when we left the concept of the priesthood of believers and moved to the professional ministry model, that's really when church growth and church multiplication stopped or slowed down significantly in the U.S.
Well, yeah, and let's be frank, seminary rarely creates a passion in people. I'm not saying
not a lot of words and letters have to change to get from seminary to cemetery.
Yes, and not a lot of and there have been revivals in seminaries, but there's a reason why they needed to have revivals in seminaries, because there was nothing going on before.
We are not bashing seminaries.
We are for people who go to seminary. We really are. I've done that a few times, but nonetheless, Ephesians 4 still exists, that we exist to build up them.
Right.
And whether they are apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, whatever their giftedness is, I got to figure out what that is and release them for the kingdom work that they're actually called for, and instead of dumbing it down. So,
now I view this as, and we're actually putting together a conference that we're calling Mobilize Conference. So I view this way. I view it as, you've got to be able to bring people in the door. You've got to, I'll get in trouble for this phrase inside of churchy world circles, but you've got to be attractive. You've got to attract people to the gospel and to yourself.
Jesus attracted people, did he not?
Yes, he did.
Yes.
And attractional church is not a cool thing now. It was when I was, anyway, long story. But so you've got to bring people in. People have to find Jesus. Use an old phrase that I'll also get in trouble for, they got to get saved. So this has to happen.
You almost said the dirty word of evangelism.
I did. You got to evangelize people, and this is not an okay word anymore for some reason in the church world. But at any rate, you got to bring people in. But then we've got a mutual friend, John West, who is working very, very hard on discipleship pathways. So you got to grow people up. They have to have a relationship with Christ, but then they must become more like Christ. Yeah. But see, I view this as, you got to bring them in, you got to grow them up, and then what you're teaching that is really new to us because we lost it somewhere is then you got to send them back out, because it used to be gather, keep. That really was our trend. Like when you and I first started in ministry, that was the trend in the U.S. That was the thing.
Could you hold on to it?
Yes, gather, keep, gather, keep. Now it's bring in and send.
Well, gather and scatter. Right?
Gather and scatter. That's excellent.
Yeah.
You said that better than I did.
Well, somebody else said it way before me. But again, I go back to New Orleans. in the whole missional conversation, that's when it shifted for me, because we talked about how to be a missional church, which meant how are we a missional people. And so we would talk about not raising up churchgoers, but raising up missionaries. And that changes the way you view the people who are now around you. Like, they're not church attenders. They are missionaries back to the world they just came from on Monday through Friday. Now, how do I equip them as a missionary? And there are a lot of church planting things that we teach church planters that every person needs to know: exegeting their culture, figuring it out. How is Jesus relevant in this situation? How, to that realtor, how is Jesus relevant to the people around that table? And talking their language. And so, something you said earlier, like we do need to send them back into the bars. We do need to send them back into those places. So, yes, gather. I still think I agree with that. And that's true for some, but there are some still who may never ever come to that church, but they may go to that bar, and they may go to that real estate agent's Bible study.
Gather just can't become, in my mind, gather and keep. Because if you do that, you used a phrase a little bit ago, if you do that, they become my people. Because I need to hold on to my people. When it's just never my people. It's always God's people that need to be reaching more people to become God's people.
Well, and I think, you can speak to this better than I can, but if we're not careful, it does become a my kingdom thing.
Yes, it can.
And how do I how do I hold on to my people? How do I keep this thing I built? And that's hard. But a kingdom mindset says, man, they're his. They're to be leveraged for the kingdom. So we started using that. Like, he didn't create you to be large. He created you to gather a group of people to be leveraged for the kingdom. And that's just a different mindset, because now you don't have to hold on to them anymore. You're actually trying to figure out, they're the heroes, what's best for them, how are they used, that Ephesians 4 thing, right? We're supposed to be the equippers, so we equip them for ministry. Now, in the past, I think we would have said, I did equip them for ministry. I taught them how to greet. I taught them how to hand out bulletins. I taught them how to run planning center well. But they're just made for so much more than that. Why don't we equip all of God's people for the job, the mission, the Great Commission, right? And they'll have different parts. Some people will never host a watch party, but they might be great hosts for the other. I think we just got to figure out how it all works together.
Agreed. I think in the end, what we've got to figure out as a church, and at New Life as a church and as the church, Big C Church, we've just got to figure out how to do it all. I think over time, we've tried to oversimplify our teaching by saying, well, you just need to grow a big church. That's gather, keep. Or, no, you just need to do house churches. Well, that's not a rhino or rabbit. It's all both and.
Well, isn't that our world?
All got to happen.
Our world makes you... We don't want to go to politics, but it does force you to go to one end or the other and choose, right?
Yeah, but really, you need to be right in the middle.
Absolutely.
So
anyway, we are an and.
This is, and we're going to be talking to John here in another one of our Let's Talks. But this is why this conference has kind of come together. Is often you go to in pastor world, you'll go to these conferences and you get. They're going to teach you discipleship, or they're going to teach you church planting, or they're going to teach you church growth. But you rarely go to one that kind of says, you know what, you really got to do all this. And you don't have to do all of it on this grand scale.
No, that's the point. You don't have to be overwhelmed by it. But
it
is a pipeline. It is a path that we're
not all created to be Joel Osteen. Yeah. Thank God, because I'm not that pretty in a suit. But we've got to do all of this. So I am thrilled, and I want to say how much I appreciate the investment you've made, and our leaders here at New Life, and the investment you're making with your life to see, dude, I actually think, and I'm just being honest with you, I think you misnamed your ministry, because I think 1,000 is too small a number. I think God will bless that.
Yeah, so, and I think you're probably accurate. Like, God's going to do way more than I imagined, and that's probably just my little faith. Like the first year, we should have averaged 100 a year for 10 years to get to 1,000. We did 160 in the first year.
That's awesome.
Right? And so, and then there's this, like, same as compound interest in the banking world, there's this compound thing that happens when you plant churches that plant churches. So you've planted churches, right? And you've gone, man, I need grandkids. That's part of your desire to see the DNA you had in your kids, which is your church you planted, to then plant a church, right?
And that is just now starting to happen.
You've
with
said
us.
that out
Yes.
loud for a long time, but you don't have any control over your grandkids or great grandkids.
No.
Unless you give that DNA to them. And so this whole idea of not holding on, like I appreciate that about you, is that you've been quick to release people, to plant churches, to let, and you've even said like those people are reaching, that planter is reaching people I would never plant. It's being done in a different way, bless the kingdom, release you to go do that, right? But the only way you're going to have influence over this great grandchild that's out there of a church is the DNA that so I'm grateful for the DNA that you put in your kid churches so that they have a DNA passed on. And that's just what I don't only work with planters, I work with sending churches because I think, and even motivating churches to be sending churches to help them realize they don't have to be large. There's an attitude that they do have to have, and that's an equipping of all the saints, releasing of people. And not everybody's to be a church planter.
No.
Matter of fact, I don't even think that's healthy.
No.
Some are meant to do that, but they can have influence where they are, but let's figure out where they are, triangulate their calling. We talk about it kind of like cell phone towers do. They triangulate, well, there's where you are. I think God has a beautiful way of figuring out who you are, and when you understand that, man, you can run with all your energy in that direction. But if you don't know who you are, you don't know who you were created to be, you can't. And that's kind of my story. That's back to 1,000 churches. Like it was a day laying on my floor, having a moment with God. He said, that's what you're created to do, Dwight. Crud. Well, that means I got to resign that thing. It's painful. It's painful to say goodbye to the things you've known. Like, this is not a funded ministry, so this is me figuring out how my family survives in the meantime. But believing God will take care of me if I do what He's called me to do. So there's those moments of trepidation like anybody else who songs talk about stepping out on the water and see what's going to happen. But it's been nothing. My wife will say, wow, you wake up with purpose every morning. You wake up with energy every morning. You wake up with a newfound joy every morning. And I think that's what happens when you kind of triangulate what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. And we're finding influence. I mean, you and I are Wesleyan, but John and I have partnered together to do what it is we do. And we actually think one flows into the other and helps the other. And so that's kind of where we partnered up in this. We realized that you are a tremendous benefit to helping us understand how to bring that evangelism gift into this and how to gather so that we can scatter. So we think it's going to be a beautiful partnership in the future, something that blesses not only the Wesleyan Church, but a lot of other denominations in the process. But it's just not the way we've thought about church. Let's be fair. You and I have been doing this for a long time. It is not how we've thought about church, and we think there needs to be a shift. And it's not a new thing. It's actually what John Wesley did. It's what the Baptists did. Like, it's all been done before. We're just recommitting ourselves to the thing that actually worked. And we got a little too professional for ourselves, outthought ourselves, and thought we were making progress when in reality we were losing ground.
Right. That's right. So we'll just ask everybody out there to pray for us because we're doing a trial run of this conference. And we're building it as we fly. This out. We're building it as we fly, and so I think God can use this because I do think the church has got to learn how to do more than one thing right, and if we can do that, then God can make a huge difference in the world. So
thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.